We often hear that women balance men in the workplace, but if you think about what we're saying, it really doesn't promote women's equality. We still create the perception that men are the driving force of the workplace. They're the ones who go out and get things done, and women, well, we just temper their efforts. So as men speed up from 80 to 90 to 100 miles an hour, women apply the brakes and slow them down so that they don't crash and burn. Now that sounds really valuable, except it doesn't create the perception that women can also be in the driver's seat and they can be the driving force of the workplace. So in this video, I'm going to show you how we need to change how we think about balance so we not only recognize women's equality, but we also finally recognize that women are critical in enabling our workplaces to be able to speed up from 80 to 90 to 100 miles an hour while also achieving higher levels of performance. Now, if you've been paying attention to the biggest issues in the male-dominated workplace for the past 60 or 70 years, it's been all about achieving this. And there's been a long line of management gurus, experts, and consultants coming up with all kinds of new programs to achieve this that never quite live up to their expectations. And the reason is because they all forget one thing, and that is that the only way to achieve this is by women working in equality and balance with men. Normally, when we think of balance, we think of two concepts. The first is a set of scales, and this is the concept many of us use to measure women's equality. We believe we will achieve equality when there are 50% men and 50% women in every profession, skilled trade, boardroom, and elected office, and when 50% of the people staying home to raise children are men. In this concept, balance is a delicate state that only exists if equal numbers of men and women are willing to do every job and everything remains static. But we all know that isn't realistic, so we accept that imbalance is natural, which brings us to our second concept of balance. We also think of balance in terms of pendulum swings. For a while, the pendulum swings in one direction, but then it goes too far. So we react and swing the pendulum in the opposite direction until it goes too far that way, and we react again and swing the pendulum back in the opposite direction. As a result of this motion, we spend very little time in a state of balance. But we ignore this because while the pendulum is swinging upward, we think we're making progress and accomplishing great things. So we strive to push the pendulum to greater heights, forgetting that this only intensifies the inevitable downward crash. Working this way, we again accept imbalance as normal. The problem with our common concepts of balance is that as soon as we move forward or take any kind of action, we immediately fall out of balance. We then waste our time and energy making corrections, which leaves us less energy to spend on making forward progress. This is why we need a concept that allows us to maintain balance even as we move forward. Now, fortunately, we find this kind of balance in the ancient concept of yin and yang. When men and women apply yin and yang to themselves, we recognize that we are equal because we are each one half of the whole. Action requires us to influence each other and take turns as the driving force. By working in harmony, we remain in balance and keep our action efficient. This efficiency allows us to build up energy, which then increases our momentum and improves our performance. If you were in the business world back in the early 2000s, yin and yang probably reminds you of the flywheel effect Jim Collins talked about in his book, Good to Great. According to Collins, it takes great effort to start the flywheel moving, but as we keep pushing and pushing our way through a cumulative, step-by-step, action by action, decision by decision process, eventually there's a breakthrough and the momentum of the flywheel kicks in, and suddenly we hardly have to push at all because the flywheel is moving under its own heavy weight and it keeps moving forward with almost unstoppable momentum and sustained and spectacular results. But there's a flaw in the flywheel concept. Collins never mentions that our workplaces need women interacting with men in order to make the flywheel rotate. Instead, His flywheel effect sounds kind of macho, and like men, well, they don't need women, which explains why it takes so much effort to get that darn flywheel spinning. Without women, the flywheel is actually a pendulum, and all that great success men think they're achieving is just an upward swing, which also explains why flywheel companies like Circuit City couldn't sustain their results and came crashing down. The flywheel effect exposes a fundamental flaw in the thinking of our management gurus, experts, and consultants. You see, they don't believe our workplaces need the influence of women because they've always used the stereotypes to define women. And there's nothing in the female stereotypes that seems to be of significant value to the workplace. Now, we all know the stereotypes aren't true, and I certainly didn't see the thousands of men that I worked with exuding the male stereotypes. However, I did notice they had a lot of traits and behaviors in common. In other words, they all seemed to work the same way. But I always felt like there were things missing in everything that they did. So I began providing what I thought was missing. And you know what? As soon as I did, our performance improved dramatically. So I began making lists to track what my male colleagues were doing and what I was doing in order to balance the excessive male behavior in my workplaces. And eventually, I came up with a list of male traits that I called a blue zone and a list of female traits I called a pink zone. I learned that when these traits interact and influence each other, our workplaces finally work in wholeness, and working in wholeness is what makes the breakthrough of the flywheel effect happen, because we create the purple zone, and working in the purple zone is where we achieve sustained and spectacular results. All through my career, my workplaces pursued spectacular results. So they adopted one new management program after another, and they talked about making paradigm shifts in order to achieve different ways of thinking. But the truth is, there was only one paradigm shift they needed to make. They just needed to recognize that women are one half of the whole and that women bring equal value to the workplace. They just needed to recognize the full equality of women. This is Dot Callahan asking you to help me turn the woman in the room into the women in the room. Sign up for my newsletter, subscribe to my YouTube channel, or find the Woman in the Room on Facebook. It's up to you. Just keep watching and sharing my videos to get advice from a woman who's been there, dealt with that, and knows what works.